It's one of the worst attacks Ethiopia has seen in years. More than 200 ethnic Amhara people were killed in the Oromia region about a week ago. So how will the government prevent such attacks, and can it stop the rising of ethnic tension? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Hashim Ahalbara. Ethiopia is one of the most ethnically diverse nations in Africa. It also has the second largest population of the continent, but it has struggled with rising ethnic-based violence and tension in recent years. Just last week, hundreds of civilians were targeted by armed men in the Jimbe district of Ethiopia's Oromia region. Witnesses said most of the victims belonged to the Amhara ethnic group. This mass killing shocked the nation and once again brought global attention to Ethiopia's political and humanitarian crisis. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed condemned the killing, saying on Twitter, "Attacks on innocent civilians and destruction of livelihoods by illegal and irregular forces is unacceptable." There's zero tolerance for horrific acts claiming lives recently in both Benishangul and Oromia regions by elements whose main objective is to terrorize communities. He went on to say, restoring peace and security in affected communities remains our key priority. As we mentioned, Ethiopia is an ethnically diverse nation. Much of its south and west is inhabited by the Oromo people, who make up the largest ethnic group. The Amhara community is the second largest and dominates the Amhara region to the north. And there are dozens of other smaller groups. Conflicts are often fueled by groups demanding more land and power, with attempts to drive out those seen as outsiders. Let's bring in our guest in Canterbury, UK, Bizuna Getachew Yemeno. He's a lecturer in comparative politics at the University of Kent. In Nairobi, William Davison, senior Ethiopia analyst at the International Crisis Group. Welcome to the program. Bizuna, what do we know has happened in the Oromia region?
Yeah, recently there were a lot of incidents going on in Ethiopia. One of the incidents were the one that happened in Oromia, in which so many hundreds of civilians were killed, and most of them were farmers who were living there for several years. And different reports are coming out regarding the number of days, which the reports are by themselves contradictory. Mm-hmm. Some mention that there were around 200 days, and other reports mentioned that the number of the days could be up to 700. So the government also mentioned that there were incidents in which so many people died, but the government did not mention the number of days. So it is clear that a lot of civilians have been affected, have died, but we don't know exactly how things happened, who did the killing, because there is no independent investigation carried out, except the fact that so many reporters around the world were pointing fingers on the Oromo Liberation Army, which the rebel group denied and requested for independent investigation. The government also reported that the incident or the killing were carried out by the rebel group.
Okay. William, accusations, counter-accusations, the government is putting the blame on the Oromo Liberation Army. The OLA saying, on the other hand, no, it's not us, it was because of the fighting that was taking place, and they are putting the blame on the government troops.
Yes, that's correct. And it's by no means the first time we've had this sort of incident. The killing of civilians, often of Amhara ethnicity, and very strong allegations and reports of Oromo Liberation Army responsibility, and then denials. I think because the area is essentially a war zone, and the government is preventing access to journalists and researchers, it has been very difficult to authoritatively assess the details of these incidents. And when we have a relatively recent incident like this, it's particularly hard to come to firm conclusions. So all we know is that the reports that have come out so far from advocacy groups, the sort of state Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, and some media reports have blamed the OLA, but there isn't a huge amount of clear evidence that's come out so far. And the important context to understand is that these killings of civilians occur in Oromia, often in Western Oromia, often of minority Amhara citizens. But it's in the context of a insurgency by the Oromo Liberation Army that's been going on since 2018. It's increased in its intensity, and it's been met by a fearsome counterinsurgency campaign, which has involved abuses by the state security forces as well. So as well as the OLA being accused of these types of atrocities, we also see a general climate of increasing violence in the region and the killing of civilians amidst that. And at the moment, we see no sign to the sort of moves towards negotiations that seems to be needed to try and begin to reduce the level of violence in Oromia.
Joining us also is Tedros Turfi from Charlotte, North Carolina. Tedros is the chairman of the Amhara Association of America. Tedros, shall we see this in the context of the animosities between the Oromo and the Amhara?
No, I don't think this should be seen in the context of the animosity between two people. This is really an attempt by the Oromo Liberation Army with the support of many of the Oromia regional government officials, as well as elements of within the federal government, to achieve a political agenda by deliberately targeting and attacking Amharas in Oromia. And this has been going on since really 2018, when Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed allowed the OLA to return from Eritrea armed, and allowed them, gave them space to recruit and train and radicalize young Oromos in the region. In this current violence, the Kebele and Woreda administrators allowed the Oromo Liberation Army to come into the area. Several days prior to the attack occurring, the government militias that were in the area were told to leave and to allow the OLA to come in. When the OLA came in, right before the attacks occurred, the telecommunications, phone, and internet was cut off, and the attacks started early in the morning until, and lasted for over 8 hours. And the OLA was targeting specifically Amharas. The casualties that we have from our investigators in Ethiopia is at least at minimum 503 killed. 282 of those we have already have their names, their gender, and other identifiable markers. And we believe that number is probably going to be 2 to 3 times higher. So this has been going on for many years. The government has made no effort at all to protect these civilians. In fact, they have been enabling these massacres to happen in western part of the country, specifically Oromia and Benshangul Gumuz regions. And just so your audience is aware, the Kebele chairperson, Nigatu Omata, his son is a member of the Oromo Liberation Army. Kidane Morowa, the Kebele militia office chief, is also a member, has also been complicit and has been detained. Another gentleman, Kidanu Wakaya, the Oromia state militia member in the Kebele, his brother is also a member of the OLA. So the state is actually complicit in these massacres.
Could perhaps Tedros explain to the viewers how it is that the Oromo Liberation Army is both fighting an insurgency against the Oromia regional government and the federal forces? And indeed, there were some very serious incidents just a few days before with OLA attacks on Gimbi town and Dembi Dolo town, also attack on regional Gambela. So there's an ongoing insurgency, counterinsurgency between the OLA, the rebels, and the government forces. But Tedros is telling us also that the OLA is working alongside the government. So, I mean, perhaps you could explain the complexities to the viewers, Tedros.
Sure. I mean, I think, you know, the point is that the OLA has support within the government apparatus. So this is a structural problem. And the fight between the OLA and the Abiy administration and his Oromo Prosperity Party is a fight over power. That both the Oromo Prosperity Party and the OLA view the Amharas and other non-Oromos in the area as really as outsiders that have to leave that Oromia region and that the Oromo belongs to the Oromo people. This is a view held by the Oromo Prosperity Party and the Oromo Liberation Army. So there is a fight over power, but the OLA does have support within that government structure and also within the security apparatus as well. And this is very complex, and that's what makes it difficult for especially Amharas in the area.
Bizuna, if you have the Oromo and the Amhara who make up 60%, somehow 60% of the population in Ethiopia, and you see these clashes, these problems, this could be an indication that there is a huge problem in Ethiopia and that the country itself could one day explode.
Yeah, I don't think the clashes between the two ethnic groups, and I don't think it is correct to claim that there is collaboration between the Oromo Liberation Army and the federal or the regional government. Tedros mentioned that the federal government or the Oromia region and the OLA, their problem is about power. But if they are fighting for power, there is no point for them to collaborate to attack civilian. I'm not sure the report they have is even correct, because I was reading last night the report. It shows that a 1-month-old child was killed, and there is a name, date of birth, and everything. I don't think in Ethiopian culture a 1-month-old can be recorded even. So the accuracy of the report should be questioned, and that's why I mentioned at the beginning there should be independent investigation. In terms of pushing the country toward this explosion, I think this insurgency and counterinsurgency operation can be resolved through negotiation, as long as the government recognizes the legitimate grievance of that group who are operating there. It's not just something that happened in 2018, but the cause of the Oromo Liberation Front or the Oromo Liberation Army has been there since 1973. So we need to consider the background before just concluding what is going on, only associating with post-2018 issues. So it has been there. It is protracted war, but the scale has been going up and down depending on the situation. But since 2018, obviously it has increased, and the number of fatalities also increased.
William, so you have...
If I can respond to that, since
briefly, if you don't mind, briefly.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I think it's really incorrect to say that Ethiopians do not record their their birthdays or the days that they were born. I was born in Ethiopia. My parents recorded my birthday. We have a writing system and really a numeric system that is thousands of years old. And so our investigators are recording that by speaking to the victims. In addition to that, he's correct that the OLA has been operating for a very long time in Ethiopia, for over 30 years. But for a good part of the part of 30 years, they had operated mainly in Eritrea until Prime Minister Abiy allowed them to come in with their weapons. But we cannot legitimize the massacre of innocent people. You cannot legitimize an organization who's trying to achieve a political agenda by killing and massacring innocent civilians. I think that's wrong. I think with an organization like the OLA, the leaders in the organization and all those government officials who are complicit in allowing this to happen should be held accountable.
Okay, William, so you have the civil war in the Tigray, then you have the problems in the Amhara region, also the problems in the Oromia special zone. Could this be an indication that the ethnic federalism in Ethiopia has to be addressed once again, because it doesn't seem to be moving forward?
Well, there's no doubt that Ethiopia is experiencing massive political problems and violence, but ultimately the issue of federalism and the debate over federalism is part of the political polarization and their fundamentally different views over Ethiopia's history, who are the victims, the different grievance narratives, and contestation over power now in the context of federalism, that is part of the political problems that is driving the violence. So simply identifying the system as a problem is not a solution. The difficulty is bringing together Ethiopia's polarized political groups, which of course have a very strong ethno-regional component to them. And just to return to this business of the alleged collaboration by government forces or government officials and the OLA just after the OLA attacked government forces in two towns. I mean, this gives some credibility almost to the allegations of the OLA themselves that the government is responsible for these attacks. But we have no evidence of that either. All of this indicates very clearly the complexities, the disastrous politics here, the multifaceted factionalism that necessitates some form of investigation. And ultimately, again, if this political violence is going to be resolved, it has to be done through political negotiations. And at this stage, given the gathering destabilization, instability we see in Oromia, and no real end in sight to this insurgency, counter-insurgency dynamics, I think everybody should be pushing for full access to researchers, humanitarians, journalists, a truce between the parties, and the beginning of political negotiations between the Oromo nationalists and the government and the type of Amhara groups that Tedros represents, that type of ideological positioning.
Tedros, when you have a nation of almost 80 ethnic groups, how do you see the path to reconciliation?
Well, I mean, there are many organizations that have put forward ideas on reconciliation. Obviously, there has to be an independent investigation for the atrocities that have been committed in Ethiopia by all actors, and the perpetrators be brought to justice. There has to be, true transitional justice. Ethiopians, for the first time, have to see for themselves what they have been doing to each other. The violence that has been really in Oromia and in Benishangul-Gumuz region by the OLA and the Gumuz militants, particularly against Amharas, really is something that requires an independent investigation. But in addition to that, Ethiopians need to seriously discuss the type of government system that they want in the future to take them away from this violence. The problem is structural. There is no serious Ethiopian political party that is opposed to federalism. It is the ethnic federalism part that many Ethiopians are opposed to, which is really at the root cause of all these problems. So, for example, the war between the TPLF and Abiy and his Oromo Prosperity Party, it's not a fight over ideology, it's a fight over power. So they both believe in the same ideology. TPLF, established this ethnic federal system to really establish Tigray hegemony. And Abiy is trying to use that to establish Oromo hegemony. And what we're saying is that as Ethiopians, we really need to look at this ethnic apartheid federal system and see if we can move into a federal system that respects everyone's, the diversity of Ethiopia, the ethnic diversity, the religious diversity, the cultural diversity. All of that can be protected, but it does not have to be an ethnic-based political system. So there are many forms of federal systems that exist in the world that we can use as a reference.
But this is the problem. Let me go to yes, William.
I think it's important to point out, in line with what I was saying before, this Oromo nationalist rebellion by the Oromo Liberation Army, that according to Tedros, is the core reason for instability in Oromia. That is, to a degree, a product of that political group, that constituency, believing themselves marginalized. They don't want to see the eradication of ethnic federalism. They want to see what they call genuine self-determination for Oromia. Therefore, any attempts to completely remove the system because certain constituencies dislike it, that will lead to a perception of further marginalization and is likely to further fuel the rebellion and lead to more violence. These are the simple calculations that Ethiopian political actors need to understand. Unless there is some form of compromise over the political system, then we will see a perpetuation of a cycle of violence.
Yeah, but we're talking about the need to implement reforms, simply said, but when it comes to the implementation, this is where we have the problem. Bezuna, do you think it's about time for a constitutional reform in Ethiopia to put an end to the ethnic divide?
I don't think there is any issue regarding the structural or the federal order of the country. It's not literally, Ethiopia is not a unique country that adopted a multinational federal system. A multinational federal system was only a response to hundreds of years of problems in the country. The only way to hold the country that were ripping itself apart during 1990s. So the federal system were operating quite well, regardless of the lack of democracy and so many right abuses until recently. So the whole issue in Ethiopia should be seen in a broader context. What is going on in Amhara region, the conflict in Tigray, and as well as in Afar, Benishangul, in Gambela, everywhere there are a lot of conflicts that can be also associated with the party system. The fracture of the party system might also be one factor that contributed. Especially when we consider the war between Tigray and the federal government and its allies, that was associated with the fracture of the party system. The party system were the only glue that were holding the country together. So the constitutional reform, anyways, any country should conduct reform when it is required. If we consider other federations' constitution, it has been revised several times. But at this time, I don't think the constitution is the problem. The constitution were performing quite well, but the issue is, wide-ranging. So I believe there should be reconciliation and negotiation among, including the rebel groups, should come to the table and negotiate about the future of the country.
Tedros, if you want to move forward beyond ethnic politics, and you have 10 semi-autonomous federal states organized along ethnic lines, I don't see any way forward.
I agree. I think it doesn't really require a serious political analyst to see this. Just any common sense. When you have regions that are divided along arbitrary ethnic boundaries and that have disputes over land, then how can you? It makes it very, very difficult to move forward. You can revisit this ethnic-based constitutional framework that allows for protection of all, especially the smaller ethnic groups, in terms of culture, tradition, language, but allows us to move forward as Ethiopians without this ethnic-based division that is, really promulgated by this constitution. In addition, this constitution is not working very well at just one particular point.
I see your point.
If this constitution was working very well, Amharas would have political representation in Oromia or representation within the security apparatus. They do not, even in areas where they are a majority.
William, briefly, if you don't mind. So the APRDF was the umbrella organization that ran the country for many years. It was under the control of the Tigrayans. Then Abiy came to power and people thought this is going to be the beginning of the end, and then charting a new course for Ethiopia. But nothing does seem to be working for the country. What do you think should be the path that Ethiopia should take in the future?
I think that essentially the TPLF, the Tigrayan Party, was the dominant one within that ruling coalition and within the security services. I think I've tried to explain the path forward in terms of process. Unless there is effort to call truces in all of these conflicts, allow humanitarian access, media access, human rights investigation access, then we're going to see a continuation of violence. It's going to be very hard to establish the facts. But more importantly, or more fundamentally, there has to be a process of political negotiation here. And it isn't about one group that claims itself to be the biggest victim in the country getting to enforce their ideology, their vision for the country on the other.
Thank you.
Because that will perpetuate the violence. Instead, we need all the Ethiopian political actors to come to some form of compromise over the country's future.
It will be interesting to see how the political leaders in Ethiopia will be able to navigate through this complex political landscape. Tedros Tafi, Bezuna Getachew, and William Davis, and I really appreciate your insight. Thank you. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashim Ahmara, and the entire team here in Doha. Bye for now.